Okay, we're back. We're live. We're at ThinkTech Talks here on a given Monday. Let's call it Energy Monday because we have Marco Mangelsdorf on the line from Santa Cruz, California, where he's teaching in the University of California. He's from Provision Solar and Hilo, and we always like to talk to him as frequently as we can about developments in energy here in Hawaii. Welcome again, Marco.
Well, Jay, without exaggeration, I can honestly say that it is a peak pleasure for me each and every month when I know I have you to look forward to spending an hour with all the fantastic listeners. So thank you again for having me.
The same to you, Marco. Well, this is really an interesting month. We've had some things happen in the past couple of weeks that probably will change the landscape. I mean, it's extraordinary. I think they do it so we can talk about it because there's never a dearth of news. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good, around clean energy in Hawaii. So let's talk about the one thing that cast probably the longest shadow after a very interesting program in Maui called The Future of the Utility, where everyone from Hawaiian Electric came down there, everyone from everywhere came down there. I think the only people who weren't there was you and me, Marco. They talked candidly about the future of the utility, and it's a legitimate discussion because things are changing so quickly, and that was great news. So let me ask you first: what have you heard about that? What do you know about it? Akaku over there, the Olelo version in Maui took it foot by foot. They have a complete video, I think, on their site. But yeah. What do you know about that program, and do you agree with me that it was remarkable and unprecedented?
Well, I tell you, I guess you and I just didn't look out like Charlie did in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as far as finding our required golden tickets in those candy bars to be able to attend. So we just have to do our best, I guess, from afar, ex post facto, to comment on it. But I have read some of the speeches there. I haven't seen it from gavel to gavel, essentially, but there was clearly an all-star cast from both within the state and from out of state that were there to try to, number one, make sense of what is going on in our state in terms of renewable energy and the various challenges and issues that we're facing, and second, just as importantly, trying to see if we can map a way forward. And I am regretful that I wasn't able to make it, and to what extent, I have to admittedly say, Jay, and admit that having gone to events like these since roughly 79, 1980, with my first one of my first ones being at the Sheraton there in Waikiki in 1980.
That'd be 35 years ago. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. 30
some odd years ago, at risk of dating myself, is that I've become somewhat of a cynic in terms of the highfalutin, kind of grandiose, well-meaning words that are often spoken at these gigs versus the reality on the ground, the facts on the ground that my company lives and breathes by on a day-to-day basis, as well as many other PV companies, solar companies in the state. So these conferences can certainly provide venues for smart, well-meaning, educated, passionate people to get together and talk about important matters, but it remains to be seen always to what extent these gatherings translate to changes on the ground in any type of timely fashion.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's a study, a show in itself, just to sort of bridge that gap. You can have this brilliant discussion, this candid discussion, this phenomenal let your hair down kind of discussion, unprecedented in its own way. And then what next? What happens? How do you translate that into action? And somebody ought to design a kind of model that's able to do that. I mean, in a way, our discussion of it now is a bit of a model because we want to carry it forward and we don't forget it. Amnesia is the foe of action. And maybe there's something we can come up with over time to try to give these discussions legs. But I agree with you. On the other hand, I would say that it was unprecedented in the fact that utility was there in great numbers. A number of executives showed up. They flew over from Honolulu to participate in a discussion which hadn't taken place before. And that's a statement of intention, isn't it? That's a statement that they're willing to have the discussion, that they're willing to commit their executives to, to come out on it. And what does that tell us? Does that tell us anything?
Well, it tells us, in my experience of either being a part of the Hawaiian Electric Industries family of companies like my company was from 2000 to 2003, so actually being part of that corporation, and then subsequent to purchasing the company from HEI in mid-2003, I've still maintained contacts kind of up and down the food chain there. I can tell you, in my opinion, that there's been substantial and real change in terms of upper management there at HECO, Miko Helco, and that the people at the top echelons there are necessarily have to be more aggressive and progressive in their thinking in terms of being able to guide some of the biggest companies in the state in a new direction that is steps away from traditional utility company standard operations. So I do believe there is the desire there. I believe that the will is there, which probably sets me apart from a number of my colleagues who take perhaps a more negative view in terms of the will actually being there on the part of HECO, Miko, and Helco. But they're also up against some rather profound constraints in the real world and the practical world as far as what their infrastructures and what their grids can handle in terms of substantially increased amounts of distributed generation and utility scale renewable energy plants, be them solar or wind. So I continue to believe that they are in a tough position, both from multiple perspectives. But I believe the will and the desire is there to move their companies in a more active direction. So
I agree with you, Marco. I agree with you. And all indications were at that conference, according to what I've heard, a kind of a new dimension, a new departure, a new willingness, a sign of change, a sign of a willingness to entertain new ideas, new interconnect, and all that. Trying hard to satisfy the demands that have been made on them in recent years. And then, with all of that, which seems to me to be a statement of goodwill, we find that only last week the PUC issued a decision and orders which were, again, fairly punitive and which set aside the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, such as was submitted by Hawaiian Electric a few months ago, as not qualifying, and they stopped the whole IRP process, and that that has to be pretty negative. It's a negative statement against Hawaiian Electric. It's all negative. It's a negative statement against against everything that happened, and you wonder if they agree with us, or maybe they got another agenda in terms of dealing with trying to constructively move things ahead with a sort of a across-the-board collaboration. It sounds less like that and more like something punitive. What do you think?
Well, I couldn't agree more, Jay. I'm really struck by the juxtaposition of the conference at the MAC several weeks ago that I think got a lot of people excited, and I don't know if I'd say got a lot of people hopeful, but at least those participants at that conference came away with a greater degree of hope and optimism than they had probably when they first started attending the conference. And then within, a couple, 3 weeks or so, these four decisions and orders, actually two DNOs, as we call them in the business, two decisions and orders, and then two orders came out, were released last week by the Public Utilities Commission. And I mean, I'll read you just one paragraph here. It's actually just one sentence from one of the DNOs there that I think sums up very well where the Commission, Public Utilities Commission, is regarding their unhappiness with HECO and HECO's efforts at in their opinion, failing to meet the required criteria for the IRP, or the Integrated Resource Plan. So I'll just read this to you. It says, the Commission is certainly cognizant of the difficulties in analyzing and addressing these challenging issues, but is nevertheless profoundly disappointed in the caliber of the HECO company's efforts and apparent unwillingness or an inflexibility to embrace the challenges, commit appropriate resources, and provide or acquire the necessary analytical tools to address the issues identified by the Commission. And
that's heavy business.
That's more than just a slight, hey, you guys didn't do so well, you need to do better.
And following in that decision in Maui, the MECO decision last summer, where they effectively took them apart for $8 million in a punitive action, it sounds like more of the same, but maybe even worse.
Yes. Yes, it's. I was really struck. I was impressed and struck at the same time by the depth and the comprehensiveness of the analysis, especially in one of the orders put out by the PUC last week, which is Order 32053, which is available on their website for any of the watchers or listeners who want to take a look at it. But it was truly a tour de force for the Commission, from the Commission, in terms of looking at what's going on across the state, but especially with a focus on the HECO companies, what's going on across the state in terms of renewable energy and distributed generation. It was a very impressive document, but at the same time somewhat schizophrenic, in my opinion, in terms of some of their observations that seem to clash with each other somewhat.
Well, on the PU side of things, I think they really want to be in a leadership position. I mean, for the lack of any other government agency that's stepping up to be a leader, they're kind of trying to assume the role of leader, and this is their way of doing it. And I think they want to somehow motivate, the utility to do more. But I think part of that, I'm interested in your reaction, that part of that is perhaps a function of all the complaints that have been made against Hawaiian Electric by the PV installer industry, which has had no shortage of complaints over the past couple of years, and which probably, those complaints are probably not justified, in my opinion. So the question is, how much of that has affected the PUC's thinking on this?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head, Jay. I think a lot of, it's impossible to know exactly what the percentages of pressure, so to speak, are motivating the commissioners to write what they write, coming from various parties. But it's clear that from both the PV installers, the solar industry, also from homeowners, business owners, legislators, city council people, the governor, across the board, there's been no shortage of complaints about how the HECO companies have been handling the unprecedented, as a percentage, unprecedented amount of homeowners and business owners, small, medium, and large, who want to install photovoltaic systems and hook up to the utility grid. And I decided, before I knew we were going to speak this afternoon, to kind of recrunch some of the numbers and refamiliarize myself with the background in terms of solar in Hawaii over the past essentially 13, 14 years. And for example,
but before you get on that, Marco, can we take a short break just to reorganize this? We'll come back and then we'll talk about the history of the solar industry and where it's trending right now. That's Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar, who joins us by Skype phone from Santa Cruz, where he's teaching a course for University of California. This is ThinkTech Talks Energy Monday, and we're talking about some troubling developments in clean energy. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Amashta, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Marco Mangelsdorf, who joins us from Santa Cruz, California. He's teaching a course in, energy and politics, like he does in Hilo. He's with Provision Solar, which is a solar installer in Hilo. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about energy on Monday. We're talking about some troubling developments in clean energy that have been going on since the last time we talked to Marco a month ago. Anyway, Marco, you're talking about the trends in the installer industry, PV installer industry, and how PV is doing these days, according to what? The building permit numbers that you've seen?
Well, actually, more comprehensive than that. I'm relying right now, and the figures I'm going to share with you are from the reports that are put out annually by HECO, MECO, HELCO, and the Kauai Island Utility Co-op, the KIUC, independent utility on Kauai. So they report every year to the PUC in terms of the number and capacity of PV systems under various interconnect contracts that have gone connecting to the grid. So I decided to look back over that data earlier today because I wanted to refamiliarize myself, and I wanted to share that with you. For example, the first year that we had net energy metering was 2001. It actually went live July 1st, 2001. So for half a year we had NEM in 2001. 2001 to 2008, which is a period of 8 years, or actually 7.5 years, the average number of net energy metered systems that went in on an annual basis during those 8 years was a grand total of 101. 101 from 2001 to 2008. Starting in 2007 to 2008, that number doubled statewide. From 2008 to 2009, that previous number doubled. From 2009 to 2010, that number doubled. From 2010 to 2011, that number doubled. It doubled by a minimum. In other words, it was at least twice as much. From 2011 to 2012, it doubled again. So over a period of 5 years, there was a doubling or more than doubling of PV, grid-type PV projects which went online according to this kind of master set of the data. And it was between 2012 and 2013 when the doubling finally stopped, essentially, and it only went up by approximately 30 to 40%. So no one back in 2006, 2007, 2008, no one could have predicted that we were going to enjoy subsequent years, one after the other, for a total of 5 years of a doubling or more of PV capacity. And yet, and it's interesting, I used the word schizophrenic a moment ago, and which one of the words that came to mind when I was reading some of these PUC docs, is because the commissioners repeatedly observe and note, correctly so, that there are real and practical challenges of these utility companies accepting so much distributed generation renewable energy sources so quickly. They repeatedly acknowledge that. And yet at the same time, they take HECO to task for not adequately, proactively anticipating a doubling after a doubling after a doubling after a doubling after a doubling. And I asked myself, how is it that anybody, any company, has that kind of clairvoyance? Well, of course, the answer to that is we don't. And yet they I'll just call it as I see it. I found some of the criticism in this particular order rather unfair in terms of taking the eco companies to task for not being proactive enough, or somehow not knowing that they were going to get a doubling after a doubling after a doubling after a doubling after a doubling.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem unfair. In fact, I have to say that I saw it as unfair some time ago, because would we like the utility to just keep on taking it? If we make all these complaints and demand that they take everything we give them, it's going to come apart. And if it comes apart, we'll have a failure of the system or parts of the system, and we'll have blackouts. Is that what people want? I mean, we got to do this in an orderly fashion, and I think the people who make the complaints don't seem to care about that.
Well, there's a conclusion that I sometimes make rather cynically, that the only decision that would be acceptable by the utility company would be to essentially accept all comers. That is, anybody and everybody who wants to install a grid tie system of some kind and hook it up to the utility grid. And that, of course, is not possible, at least not by any analysis or any white paper or any conference that I've ever known of. So the utility company, any utility company, is out of necessity required to essentially draw some lines as to, we can accept up to this amount, and after this amount, well, we're going to have to really think about it, or we're going to have to say no. And that essentially, in a nutshell, is where we collectively have been over these past months, if not longer. And it's a very painful position to be in, and I'm not immune from it at all as a small business owner in this business, because I'm coming up against those limits in Helco land on the Big Island, and I don't like it. And I can get impatient sometimes with my utility friends, but I don't believe there's any presumption of what I call bad faith. Essentially, once we as an individual or as a human being decide that an individual or a company, whether it's a friend of ours or a wife or a boyfriend or a child or whomever, once we come to that determination in our own mind and our own heart, a presumption of bad faith that this person really has deceived us or has hurt us or has not been honest with us, it's very, very difficult for that person or that entity to get back on our good side. And my concern that I have is that there are seemingly too many people in the state who have, whether they're conscious of it or not, come to that kind of conclusion of bad faith, that HECO is acting, has been acting, will continue to act in bad faith if real and substantive changes aren't essentially forced upon them. And I just don't feel that is the way that we should collectively go to get to where we need to go.
I agree with you 1,000%, Marco. Well put. And it's really too bad, because this kind of contention, this kind of punitive action, this kind of attribution of bad faith, where there's no evidence of that at all, but between the media and the Hawaii Solar Energy Association and some members of the legislature, have created this aura of bad faith, and it sticks, even though it was never really true in the first place. And I think that it gets in the way. It's an obstacle in the road toward an appropriate course of action toward clean energy, and I think it's being destructive right now. Let me also add, by the way, that with all of this, there's all this news that we have tons of PV in the state, that we're way ahead of where we might have been, that we're ahead of other states, that we're going gangbusters toward clean energy with PV, as opposed to a few years ago when it was more like, let's have an array of sources of clean energy. Now it's all about PV. Everything is about PV. Wind has fallen, way behind the PV. Nobody talks much about geothermal. Ocean energy is history. Algae is history. Even biofuels are history, courtesy the AKP decision for the second or third time. So the result is that we're only talking about PV, and I wonder what your thought is about whether we're really making the kind of progress we should be making. We seem, in my view, there's a question about whether we might be stuck here because we haven't really been moving ahead in a way, across the board. We've just been fighting about PV all day. What's your thought?
Well, I agree to some extent, and I do want to give, I don't want to be too harsh on my PUC friends because I do have a lot of respect and admiration and genuine friendship for the PUC commissioners that I know. And there was a lot of really solid, very thoughtful analysis as well that they contributed in these two orders and then the two decision and orders. And a couple things I want to mention, which is perhaps in a roundabout way addressing your question, Jay, is that they gave some hard scrutiny, or giving hard scrutiny to the net energy metering program, essentially questioning just how fair it is to allow a subset of utility ratepayers, which of course net energy metered customers are a subset, as in 10% or less of all ratepayers, to allow this small subset to reap the benefit of being able to get retail credit for their kilowatt hours, which means that those majority ratepayers are essentially subsidizing to some extent the fact that HECO, HELCO, MECO, and as of several years ago, KIUC, was providing preferential treatment to net energy metered customers. So the commissioners address that, or trying to address it in a forthright fashion. And I had decided to look up those numbers from documents filed to the PUC in late January. And at least for HELCO, HECO, MECO, as of December 31st of 2013, it was estimated that the total loss to HECO from all net energy meter systems installed to date as of the end of last year was around $38.5 million. $38.5 million. Mm-hmm. And what I find interesting is that it's the PUC that is being explicit in their concern about how fair that is, whereas I have not known of HECO, the HECO execs, having put forth that they have concerns about that, and they have concerns that this is not fair to the majority of ratepayers, which is exactly what a number of utilities in the mainland have, in fact, been pursuing rather aggressively. Now, I'm not saying I think that's necessarily a good idea, but I'm struck by the fact that it's HECO that has lost $38.5 million in revenue because of the cumulative net energy metering cost, and yet they seem to be fairly silent on it in terms of not making a big deal out of it, whereas it's the PUC commissioners in these latest analyses, which is essentially questioning how fair it is to continue the net energy metering program as it has been practiced so far over the past 13 years now.
Yeah, I mean it's really some kind of sacred cow, and it shouldn't be. I don't know why guys who just connect and like to have net energy metering and send power back can get along on $17 or $18 a month as a base fee. That base fee, in my opinion, should be way higher than that in order to democratize the whole situation. And if you can't connect, if you can't sell energy back to the utility, that's not a big crisis because you have your PV and you can generate it and you can buy energy at night. I don't know what the big hassle is about that. Finally, I don't know why people who are concerned about this can't buy storage of one kind or another. It is available in the market. Joe Saturnia is selling it. I think some of the other installers are selling it now. So I think it's become a sacred cow. I don't think Hawaiian Electric wants to touch it. They don't want to raise the base rate. And they want to leave net energy metering just the same way it was and have to buy it back at a loss. I think all of that should be changed in order to rationalize and make the existing system more fair given the disparity.
Well, and interestingly, I'll just note that KIUC dumped their NEM program several years ago. They've had what they that doesn't mean you can't connect with a grid-type system on Kauai. You can as a homeowner, but it's under an avoided cost rate contract, which means that you will be paid, the KIUC ratepayer will be paid at the wholesale rate instead of the retail rate.
Perfectly fair.
I agree, that hasn't caused the PV market to collapse over on Kauai. Another interesting thing that I found of note in some of the PUC's analysis is that they correctly note that the HECO companies have been giving, shall I say, preferential treatment to those essentially homeowners who want to install PV systems 10 kilowatts or less in capacity, as far as, which I actually have supported over these past years, because I'd much rather see 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 homeowners get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kilowatt systems rather than have that capacity be gobbled up by 100, 200, 500 kilowatt projects. But they essentially pose the question, is it fair, is it right that the HECO companies should give essentially preferential treatment to 10 kilowatt and under systems, and by contrast give greater scrutiny to those project developers who want to put in 100, 200, 300 kilowatt system. So they're really, they use the word rationalization or rationalize. They're trying to rationalize the rather kapakahi current structure in terms of these various rate contracts, and look at it from a more macro perspective to see what is really fair and what is really just. So I really salute them for putting a lot out there in terms of again, it was really a tour de force in terms of the comprehensiveness of their analysis.
Well, somehow we are at a turning point, you know. The decision in order, whether you like it or don't, whether you see it as constructive or not, it certainly identifies the issues. It certainly puts us at a place where we have to consider them. And maybe it's when Robbie Am was leaving Wine Electric, he said there was not too much left in the pipeline, and that we were essentially at a turning point. And I think the turning point is now more visible, and there's more happening somehow in terms of people stepping up to the plate. I think the PUC sees this as stepping up to the plate and creating new leadership models for us. Let's take a short break. It's Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar and Hilo, joins us from Santa Cruz, where he's teaching a course in energy and politics in the University of California. This is ThinkTech Talks, Energy Monday, talking about some troubling developments in clean energy. When we come back, we'll talk about Sopogy. In fact, it was in PBN this very morning, and we'll talk about what happened and what that means, what it demonstrates about solar, what do they call it? Solar.
Concentrating solar power.
Concentrated solar power, and what that means to the technology going forward. We'll be right back.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live here on ThinkTech Talks, Energy Monday, talking about some developments that may be somewhat troubling in clean energy with Marco Mangelsdorf, our correspondent with Provision Solar, now on Skype with us in Santa Cruz, where he's teaching a course in energy and politics for the University of California. So Marco, Sopogy. Sopogy was a household word. Everybody knew about Sopogy, and Darren Kimura, the founder of it. It was a great hero, and he did amazing things, or so it seemed. And now Sopogy is no more. Various corporate changes, and he dissociated himself from the company ultimately, and it closed its doors, according to Dwayne Shimakawa at Pacific Business News. I think it was today, in today's edition online. So, what do we know about this? What do we know about the rise and fall of Sopogy, and what does it mean?
It's a really juicy question, and I have at least a couple of angles to take. One is that in the 14 years that I've been living and breathing solar and renewable energy in Hawaii, I have noticed or I perceive what appears to be a real hunger on the part of the media and on the part of elected officials to see and want to see a local, in this case, local boy, local guy, done good. And one of the first example I can think of is Dustin Shindo.
Sure.
Dustin Shindo and his several associates and friends that he had known for a very long time, who got Hoku Scientific into headlines when he started his company, which branched off to a number of other various businesses, including solar, Hoku Solar. There was an incredible press coverage, almost with very glowing press coverage with a company that was one of the first in a long time, of a Hawaii company that actually went public and was traded on the NASDAQ. And Hoku met with their demise over the past couple of years for various reasons, and we don't hear much about Dustin Shindo anymore. He's moved on to...
It's also an energy company. It's interesting. It was also an energy company. Remember Fuel Cell and then solar? They
Yes.
sort of did a switch. And now
in fact.
Dustin is into software, and so is Darren Kimura,
Okay.
by the way.
So we had Dustin, who was the first, the kind of notable golden boy, local guy made good, who was doing fantastic things and changing the world and finding all kinds of investor money, getting great press coverage, and that Hoku didn't work out. And then Darren Kimura kind of followed in Dustin's footprints to some extent. And I happen to like both of these individuals. I think they're both good guys. But Darren
Both from the Big
also
Island, too, yeah?
Yeah, they were both very good at convincing not a small number of people that they had great ideas and they were going to go places and do wonderful things. And as we know with Sopogy, they ultimately they weren't able to make whatever products they came up with financially viable enough to stay in business. So that's one take that I have, is that what I perceive to be this real hunger on the part of people in the States who want to see local guys make good and hit the stratosphere in terms of being able to compete with the big boys. And then the second angle is that since we had the end of the legislature this past week, Darren Kimura and Sopogy were successful, I am going to guess 6, 7, 8 years ago, at getting a $10 million special purpose revenue bond as part of the legislative session back then, which essentially, it's not necessarily the state opens up its checkbook and says, here's $10 million, Darren, go and do great things. But he was successful in essentially getting a private bill, a sweetheart bill, through the legislature, the Hawaii legislature back then, got it to the governor's desk, governor signed it. So it was through $10 million or something less of state-backed money that Darren was able to do his project at Keahole, which is close to the airport over in Kailua Kona. And that project, that CSP project, Concentrated Solar Power, as far as I'm aware, has not been producing anything close to the amount of power that it was advertised to produce. So, but again, this was an example of Darren and others able to get this sweetheart bill through the legislature, which is no mean feat, by the way, as I'm sure you're aware, and get it to the governor's desk and have the governor sign it. And then the segue from that to the current session, the session that just ended, is that there was yet another sweetheart bill for not $10 million, but $50 million, which passed the legislature. Still has to be signed by the governor, and I don't think the governor has pronounced one way or the other whether he's going to sign this bill. But this particular bill for $50 million of special purpose revenue bonds would be for a mainland energy company called the Princeton Energy Group, and a fellow there by the name of Stephen Tabor, to build a utility-scale photovoltaic system and project of unprecedented size and scope, at least for our state, on the island of Molokai, to be able to provide Molokai residents ostensibly with cheaper, more green power. And again, I take my hat off to Mr. Tabor and his associates for being able to get a $50 million bill through the legislature and this far, so that it's been sent out to the governor's desk. And what I find really kind of astounding is that it's far from clear, and I'm trying to be charitable here, it's far from clear that the Molokai residents want anything to do with such a, yet again, rather highfalutin sounding project from a bunch of well-meaning mainland haoles who are telling them that we have wonderful things to do for you, just give us a chance, and please trust us that we have your best interests at heart.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. We had Princeton on our show right around the time they were making their public appearances in Molokai, and I recall that whatever they were proposing was not met with any level of acceptance by the community in Molokai. In fact, they were roundly criticized by the community in Molokai. It was a really bad day for them when the community, shouted them down at a public meeting. And they apparently regrouped, went back and said they were going to change their plan around to comport with the community concerns. But I don't think anything happened after that, except maybe this bill. So this whole project could be in some disarray, and it is wonderment that $50 million got through the legislature on it.
Well, Tabor said he was quoted as saying in the world famous Molokai Dispatch, which is this really fantastic. I'm not being sarcastic. It's really fantastic local paper there in Molokai that comes out every once a week. I know some of the reporters there, really good folks, and Tabor was quoted as saying that his feelings were hurt, that here he came with the best of intentions to do these wonderful things for the residents of Molokai, and that, how can they not get that his heart is pure and his intentions are good, and that it was, in his words, if I'm quoting correctly, back to the drawing board.
Yep.
Since they shot down his proposal, and yet you had legislators, a majority in both the House and the Senate in Honolulu, who apparently were convinced enough that whatever Tabor and the Princeton Energy Group were promoting, that was something that they were comfortable with voting in favor of a $50 million special purpose bond. I mean, I'm just kind of stunned and a bit envious, I guess. Not that I'm trying to promote my Marco special purpose bond for my project on Molokai, because I don't have one, but I'm kind of wondering what kind of Kool-Aid he brought around as he was doing his schmoozing.
It's an interesting question.
Legislators there. He did a fantastic job. I take my hat off to him.
Marco, we have only a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to ask you, your view of the appointment or reappointment of a chair of the PUC. Mina Morito was appointed at the beginning of the of the current administration, make that almost 4 years ago, 3 and change, I suppose. She was, she had been the chair of the House Energy Committee for some years before that, and it appeared that she was a very good selection that Abercrombie made at the time. But since then, it's not clear that he is as excited about her as he was, and there's been rumors to the effect that he would replace her. But the most recent press on it has been that he's held the whole thing in abeyance, and she's on a kind of continuing program beyond the end of her term. And I wonder what all that means. How does it affect the election? How does it affect the PUC? Where does it play in the turning point we've been talking about?
Well, I can't claim that I'm privy to all that insider information, Jay, but I do want to first off say that I I have the utmost respect for Mina Morita. I think she works her tail off in a really difficult job there, and is incredibly committed, incredibly passionate about trying to move the state in the right direction. So I think very, very highly of Mina, and I've had the chance to meet with her on a few occasions over the past year. So I think very highly of her. And
you're not
and
the only
I'm very,
one, Marco. I mean, there have been many people that have supported her in this moment of reappointment or not. And I would say that a number of people in the energy community feel the same way about it.
I think, like you mentioned, given the fact this is an election year, I think that if in fact the governor was of the persuasion at some point that he was not going to renominate her for another full term, because if I'm not mistaken, she was filling the final years of the term of the previous chair, Carl Caliboso. So that if he was not going to appoint her to a full term, that somehow at some point these past, 5 or 6 weeks, he decided that the political downsides were more than the political upsides in moving forward with that, given the fact that Mina has a lot of support in the legislature and in the community who essentially made their support clear to Neil Abercrombie and probably considered or prompted him to reconsider what the net benefit versus the net loss would be, or net negatives would be, if he were to let her go. And he took a middle road. He decided not to, at least for now, appoint her to a full new term, but have her be a holdover, which, if I'm not mistaken, essentially allows her to serve at his prerogative past the scheduled end of this current term, which would be in June. So I think, as Forrest Gump once said, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up. That's all that we have to say about any of that for now. But we'll be back together, hopefully in a month. Marco Mangelsdorf and me, Marco from Provision Solar, on Skype from Santa Cruz, where he's teaching a course at University of California in politics and energy, which he does the same thing at UH and Hilo. This is ThinkTech Talks. We're talking about energy here on Monday. We're talking about some troubling, disconcerting developments in energy. Maybe next time when we come back, we'll have some better news on all of these things. Marco, thank you so much. I hope you're returning to Honolulu pretty soon. I look forward to talking with you and seeing you.
Thank you, Jay. It's always a pleasure, and I will wait with great anticipation until the next day and the next hour when we have a chance to converse again.
The same thing, Marco. Thanks again.
Thank you.